Autumn is harvesting time for heather honey on the farm of Georg Klindvoort. This apiary is located in the cultivated heathland area between Bremen and Hamburg and specializes in comb honey and pressed honey. In the building facing the farmhouse, the beekeeper works on the skeps from which the honeycombs are to be removed. Up to 1,000 straw skeps are stored here out of reach of the bees. The stability of the combs in a skep is preserved by 6 thin rods or spiles carefully inserted through the sides. The bees have fixed their combs to the spiles, so they must now be carefully removed. The spiles are cut from either rose or black alder wood and will be used again next spring. The combs are also cemented securely to the walls and the top of the skep, but a blow at an angle to the combs will loosen them. The honey harvest begins with the removal of the comb honey. Georg Klindvoort reserves this work for himself. Comb honey is heather honey sealed in new white combs which have not been used for brood rearing. Besides, every comb has empty wax cells and darker cells filled with honey and pollen. These different pieces of comb are divided and placed in a wax barrel and a honey barrel. The comb honey is cut and packed as pound or half-pound portions by Edeltraud, the apprentice. Comb honey is a speciality of the heathland beekeeper. Only heather honey is thick enough not to run out of the cells after they are cut. In a Lüneburg-type heather skep, the bees draw out 9 combs. Comb honey is found primarily over the central brood nest in the skep, at the top, and along the wall behind the brood nest. Comb honey consists of completely built and well-filled cells because bees seal the cells only after they have been filled out with honey for some time. The beekeeper must often jog the skep once more to dislodge the last narrow comb from it. With a special tool, the beekeeper scrapes off the remaining wax from the skep walls. Wax has been valued for centuries, so even the smallest pieces are collected. In an average year, the beekeeper harvests about 2 pounds of comb honey from a skep, but in a particularly good year, the yield can be 20 pounds. Comb honey is very highly prized. By Christmas, the annual yield will have been sold at 25 marks for a 500-gram pack. Pressed honey is subsequently extracted in a room in the barn which can be well heated. This work is undertaken by Georg Klindvoort, the head beekeeper's son, and himself a master beekeeper. He uses a Stader-type screw press. The pieces of comb, which have been cut off during the separation of comb honey and collected in barrels, have been kept warm in a heated cabinet for a day at 35 degrees Celsius. This allows the honey to flow out of the cells more easily. After cutting up the pieces of comb containing pollen and honey cells into smaller pieces, They are filled into a pressing cloth of the type used for fruit pressing. To prevent the cloth opening during the pressing, the ends are twisted together and laid with the opening facing downwards in the press. The beekeeper washes his honey-covered hands in a special water bucket. This water can be used later to feed the bees. By turning the screw, he forces the block against the pressing cloth. Through the ribs on either side, the honey flows out of the press and drains off onto the take-off board. The honey containing tiny pieces of wax and pollen is collected in a bucket. When the honey ceases to flow, the press is opened. With clean hands, the beekeeper kneads the tightly pressed wax inside the cloth so as to loosen it. A second pressing extracts the last remaining honey from the wax pieces. It requires the utmost effort to close the press once more, but finally the last of the honey is squeezed out. The pressed honey is poured into 600-pound barrels in order to clear it. To filter out coarse pieces, the beekeeper pours the honey through a fine mesh screen. He then makes the press ready for the next run, collecting the lumps of wax which remain in the cloth to use them in subsequent wax processing. It takes the beekeeper until January to complete the work on the honeycombs from his skeps. The freshly pressed honey must stand in the barrels for about 2 days. The remaining particles of wax and pollen will then have floated up to the surface, where they are removed. This impure mixture will be used as food for overwintering hives or as stimulant feeding during the springtime. The honey must be thoroughly stirred before the beekeeper can fill it into smaller vessels. The pressed natural heather honey is sold in jars and cans. A pound is priced between 10 and 15 marks. Each can is filled with 5-pound batches of honey. empty can covers the weights on the scales. After putting lids on the cans, the apprentice takes them to the adjoining storeroom for labelling. The cartons of honey jars are also stored here. For £1 apportioning, the standard jars of the German Beekeepers Association are used. The brand of the association guarantees quality honey. The special cross-shaped labels indicate the name of the producer and the relevant identification number. The gluing board is again the responsibility of the apprentice, who finally provides each jar with a marker indicating the type of honey. The harvested heather honey is sold mainly in northern Germany, but by mail order it can be obtained anywhere in the Federal Republic of Germany too.